So thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Tafak, for inviting me to come and talk to you today. So we're going to go back a bit further in time now from a very impressive last talk. Prehistoric rock art is one of the most fascinating aspects of our historic environment, but it's also one of the most poorly understood and undervalued. It's kind of effectively faded out of public awareness. So the Lost Stones of Strath project aimed to bring rock art back into focus, back into the public gaze through community engagement and community excavation. The excavation only finished a few weeks ago, and post-excavation analysis is still ongoing. So this is really an interim report on the dig outcomes and community engagement. And I just wanted to thank SSE Renewables, Griffin and Kaliaka Community Fund and Perth and Cross Heritage Trust for funding the dig. Can everyone hear me? It's coming and going. Right. So prehistoric rock art, of course, refers to the cups, rings and grooves that are pecked into boulders and outcrops in the landscape and also associated with some prehistoric monuments. Although these basic motifs for cups, rings and grooves are quite simple, there are hundreds of subtle and probably deliberate variations in their form and in their combinations and arrangements with each other and with the rock surface. So the carvings were created in the Neolithic and Early Bronze Age, but they're really tricky to date, so our chronology of them is rather blurry and imprecise. And rock art in Scotland is part of a much wider prehistoric carving tradition. There are similar carvings in parts of England, Wales, the island of Ireland, and also in Western Iberia, Spain and northwest Spain and Portugal. So this suggests that there was connectivity and sharing of ideas between these regions in the Neolithic and Early Bronze Age. We know of over 3,000 carved outcrops and boulders in Scotland, or panels is the word that I'll be using a lot in this talk. And the distribution, as you can see from these maps, the distribution of these is uneven. There are particularly high concentrations around Kirkcudbright and Dumfries and Galloway, around Kilmartin in Argyll and Bute, and around the Loch Tay, Strath Tay area of Perth and Kinross. There are over 500 panels just in that Loch Tay, Strath Tay area alone, making this the densest rock art area in Scotland. What we have today surviving is probably only a fraction of what there originally was in the landscape. You know, so much has been destroyed, so much is probably still waiting to be discovered. So the carvings would have been a really prevalent part of that prehistoric landscape, and their sheer abundance signifies their probable importance, excuse me, to the people that created and used them. But rock art is a challenging topic to study, and we still know very little about, why they were made, how they were used, or their significance to people in the past. There have been a handful, really, despite the kind of huge volume of rock art, there's only been a handful of rock art sites excavated in Scotland, including 3 around Loch Tay and Strath Tay. And the outcomes of these excavations in Scotland have been very varied. Some have found very little evidence of prehistoric activity, whereas others, such as Richard Bradley's work on Ben Law's estate and also Andy Jones's work at a site called Torvlaren near Kilmartin, these have found a lot more evidence, things like cobbled platforms, evidence of burning, huge quantities of quartz and quartz fragments, and kind of shoved into fissures in the rocks, and also kind of other structured deposition of lithics on and around the rock surface. So excavations can provide crucial evidence, crucial insights into the activities surrounding the production and use of these carvings. And excavation, of course, also provides a fantastic opportunity for communities to actively engage with rock art. So these two kind of objectives really lay at the heart of the Lost Stones of Strath Tay community excavation. So first of all, we had to identify sites to excavate, and we homed in on 2 sites near Aberfeldy, the Mains of Murphley and Knocknaeglas. There were several reasons really for these choices. First of all, both these sites are located within the rich prehistoric landscape of Strath Tay, so they're close to numerous Neolithic and Bronze Age ritual monuments and possibly relatively dense prehistoric settlement within the Strath. The Excavation then, in this area could possibly shed some light on the relationship between the carved stones and the wider prehistoric landscape of that area. The context of these two sites is rather different from previous excavations in this area here. So they could provide excavation here could provide contrasting evidence. Both these sites are situated within farmland on the sort of gentle lower slopes, about 100 metres above the valley floor in Strath, whereas earlier excavations have all been much higher altitudes, between 350 and 450 metres above sea level, well above the current cultivation level in rough grazing and moorland. So, we could get contrasting evidence here. Both these sites have got clusters of a small cluster of carved rocks associated with them. There's 3 at Mains of Murphley and 5 at Knocknaeglass. So we've got 8 panels in total. And on these panels, we've got a variety of motifs which are typical of this area. So some have just got cut marks, others have got cups with more complex but relatively modest motifs on them. And from a very important practical point of view, the sites are accessible to volunteers, to school groups, public visits, and they both have very accommodating landowners. So preparatory work started in May this year, and we had several stalwart members of the Breadalbin Historical Society helping to remove shrubs and moss from the surface of the panels so that we could see the carvings, make the carvings visible. And Historic Environment Scotland's digital documentation team then came out and completed a digital survey of the sites. So we were ready to begin excavation in early September. And our main objectives with the excavation were, first of all, to establish, were these stones in their original location, or had they been moved at some point in the past? And if they were in situ, could we identify any prehistoric activity associated with their creation and use? And we were also interested in exploring, what happened to them after prehistory? What were their later biographies? On our wish list was possibly finding new carvings which might have been covered up previously and not recorded, and ideally also recovering evidence that could help us better understand their chronologies and potentially their paleo-environmental context as well. So not a great big ask, really. So the excavation ran over 12 days in early September. It was supervised by Clyde Archaeology, and we had 91 volunteers with us, some of whom is lovely to see in the audience today. And people dug with us for 1 or more days, averaging about 18 people on site each day. So what do we find? Well, let's start with Mains of Murphley. This is a natural mound with at least 3 carved stones on it. These were first recorded by Romilly Allen in 1882, and you can see a couple of Romilly Allen's drawings there of the stones. Mains of Murphley 1 at the west end of the site is a large igneous glacial erratic. It's about 3.5 meters long and kind of 1.5 meters high, maximum height. And it's got 8 cut marks on its upper surface. Mains of Murphley 2 and 3 are located at the east end of the site within a fairly extensive scatter of stones and boulders. Both are quite large panels, about 2 to 2.5 meters long, and they have multiple cut marks and some more complex motifs on their upper surfaces. Mains of Murphley 3 is the most elaborate of the stones, and you can see, particularly from Romilly Allen's drawing, but you can see that there's a series of cups with multiple rings, and these are aligned along a natural fissure and quartz vein that runs across the rock surface. So we opened a trench around each of the panels and removed obviously topsoil and field clearance that was piled against each of the stones. Beneath this, there was a relatively homogeneous brown subsoil going right down to the natural. And this subsoil contained quite a few bits of things like old rusty farm equipment. There was a sickle, a bit from a horse bridle, and other bits and pieces like that, as well as glass bottles, fragments of glass and glazed pottery, pieces of slag, and a decorated metal ring. Here are some of the finds here. We had hoped that the Mains of Murphley 2 and Mains of Murphley 3 panels were in their original locations because, they're quite sizable, 2 to 2.5 meters long. But both these panels were lying within this brown homogeneous subsoil with bits of historical artifacts around them. So they'd obviously been moved at some point before they were recorded by Romilly Allen in the late 19th century. It is possible that they were perhaps dragged by horses from one of the neighbouring fields during land improvements in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. Mains of Murphley 1, on the other hand, was much too large to have been moved. It was definitely in situ. But here also, we only found evidence of historical activity. So lots of slag, remains of glass bottles, and a coin dating to 1919. So it seems that the whole site at Mains of Murphley has been used as a dumping ground, possibly for centuries. And we're no wiser about the prehistoric activity associated with these 3 carved stones at Mains of Murphley, but we've got some really interesting sort of historical stories about their later biographies, which is, just really interesting to see. But we also learned that really important lesson that, if you've got a massive piece of rock, it's not necessarily in situ, and only excavation can really determine that. So that's really important for rock art if we're doing things like spatial analyses of them. You really do need to excavate to know if they're in their original location or not. So let's move on to the second site at Knocknaeglas. This is also a low mound. It's about 1 kilometre east of Mains of Murphley. And again, there are quite a few large boulders on the surface of the mound. 5 of these have got carvings on them. These were recorded by Hugh Macmillan in 1884, but unfortunately we don't have any drawings from that antiquarian period. They were also then recorded in detail and 3D modelled by Scotland's Rock Art Project in 2019. So of the 5 stones that are carved, Knocknaeglas 4 and 5 only have cut marks. Knocknaeglas 2 and 3 also have some slightly more elaborate motifs, cups with 1 ring around them. Knocknaeglas 1 is the largest and also the most elaborately carved panel. So it's about 4 meters long, and it's got, as well as cut marks, it's got a variety of more complex motifs on its upper surface. So we opened a trench around each of these 5 carved panels and removed the topsoil and quite a lot of clearance material piled against each one. Beneath the clearance material was, again, homogeneous brown subsoil. But here, unlike the Mains of Murphley, we didn't find bits of old rusty farm machinery and tools. So the boulders were sitting on the natural and just surrounded by this subsoil. So they were in their original location. However, we didn't find any evidence of human activity around the 3 smaller and smaller panels with simpler carving. So that's Knocknaeglas 3, 4, and 5. The only thing we found was a piece of fragment of quartz which was possibly worked. Knocknaeglas 1 and 2 were more interesting. So we'll just look at each of those in turn. Knocknaeglas 2 had a cluster of smooth quartz pebbles positioned against its eastern edge in the lower subsoil. These were of different colours and beautifully kind of smoothed and rounded. Although we were finding quartz and other stones throughout the subsoil across the site, none of them were smoothed. So these pebbles had been brought deliberately to the site and positioned and placed in a small kind of structured deposit against the base of the panel on its eastern side. Knocknaeglas 1 had a deep, so this is a big panel with the complex carvings, this had a deep accumulation of clearance material around it. And right in the top of that clearance material, we found a small stone with a single cut mark on it, which hadn't been recorded before. So this stone had obviously at some point in the past been cleared from the surrounding field and placed against this stone. As we cleared more of the clearance material and the subsoil. We moved, kind of further down into the sort of surroundings of the stone, and new features began to emerge. So you can see in the top left image, you can see the stain of the original turf and soil line. And you can also see the picture below that is the 3D model that was made by Scotland's Rock Art Project in 2019, showing what was visible at the time with the position of the turf. So some of the features that were exposed, newly exposed, included natural linear features that form a kind of series of almost zigzag and chevron patterns running along the rock surface. And it's possible that these were perceived, their presence on this boulder was perceived as significant in the past. And certainly, rock art is associated with similar rectilinear features like this in places like Kilmartin. And these features have also got a resemblance to designs on grooved ware pottery, as well as some passage tomb art motifs and incised rock art from Orkney. We also found some interesting, unusual new carvings, and I've just for ease, because I can't point them from here, I've just numbered these. I think they show up more clearly in these enhanced snapshots, the snapshots which are enhanced in MeshLab from the new 3D model. So just to point out a few of these, at one, we've got this really interesting kind of subrectangular groove extending from this conjoined cup and ring motif, very unusual. At two, we've got a groove that's coming out of a cut mark and curving around in a large circle around another cut mark, and joining with another groove that arcs round a third cut mark. Again, quite an unusual motif. Some of the motifs also intersect with natural features. So at three, you can possibly make out two grooves, which are kind of extending from kind of radial grooves, which are extending from this conjoined cup and ring motif and intersecting, merging into this very defined natural zigzag feature below them. And this responsiveness, this association with rock art and natural features is very typical of Atlantic rock art. So as we carried on further down into the soil, towards the base of the boulder, we found a small cluster of quartz chunks placed against the south side of the panel. The largest chunk, so bottom slide, left-hand bottom, the right-hand chunk there is an interesting, a very distinctive kind of orangey colour. And I think it looks a bit like an axe head. And now this may be purely coincidental, of course, but I don't think anything was purely coincidental in the Neolithic. It may have been deliberately selected and placed against the boulder because of its resemblance to a metal axe head. The cluster of quartz was positioned directly above a quite extensive area of burning, which was itself directly on the natural. And the burnt area forms kind of two centres, and the rock surface behind it is all damaged and spalled from the heat of the fires. So it's likely that this burnt deposit is prehistoric. We're hoping to get some radiocarbon dates from it and maybe some paleobotanical evidence as well. So kind of watch this space. Interestingly, the quartz deposit and that burnt area are situated in the one position where you get, if you're standing in it or next to it, you get this view of all the carvings and the view beyond of all this kind of sweep of the surrounding hills and Strath below. And similar kind of focusing of activity in relation to carvings and the prehistoric landscape, the wider landscape, have also been identified in excavations at Ben Lawes and at Tor of Laren. So overall at Knocknaeglas, what we're seeing is we've got evidence of practices involving burning and fire, practices involving the selection and deposition of quartz, and an attention to the kind of visuality of the carvings in relation to the surrounding landscape. And all these practices are conform to patterns that are identified or emerging from other rock art excavations. So I just want to spend the last few minutes then talking about the community engagement side of the dig. Our intention was to make the Lost Stones of Strath project kind of accessible to everyone. And To help us do this, we ran a series of guided tours as part of Doors Open Day. We had over 70 people visiting the site on that day, both from the local area but further away. And the vast majority of the visitors had never encountered rock art before. We were also, during the dig, we also had, we were joined by groups of young learners aged from 4 to 12, from local primary schools, Grantley and Glenlyon primary schools, and from the Dunkeld and Crannog young archaeologist clubs. So each of those groups spend some time digging in a trench around one of the uncarved stones and also drawing the rock art. And I think you can just see from this small selection of drawings here that these are wonderfully kind of wide-ranging and imaginative, kind of from representative through to abstract. So that was lovely to see these, and I just wanted to thank Sandra Davidson and everybody who helped with these events. So in terms of the thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, we had 91 volunteers digging with us for 1 or more days each. Volunteers were aged from 14 to 84, and the vast majority of the volunteers had no previous experience. Prehistoric rock art is possibly a challenging choice for a community excavation. So we were kind of interested to know and understand what were people's motives, what were their reasons for joining the dig, and what were their expectations of it. Volunteers were invited to complete an evaluation survey after the dig. And in this survey, the main motives for joining the dig were given as finding out more about rock art and contributing to knowledge and understanding. And one of the lowest scoring motives was taking part in something active outdoors. So we also asked, we were keen to find out, had the dig met people's expectations? Was it disappointing? There weren't many finds. So was that something that people were really expecting to find? So we asked people what they'd enjoyed most about the dig and in what ways they felt they'd benefited from being involved. So the responses of the orange bars on this chart, the motives of the blue bars, the responses, the outcomes and experiences are the orange bars. And so finding out more about rock art and contributing to knowledge and understanding scored a bit lower as outcomes than they did as motives. And this may reflect the relatively small number of finds, of prehistoric finds. But interestingly, the highest scoring response here was enjoyment in getting to know more people, new people. And taking part in something active outdoors was selected by 75% of the respondents compared to the 49% who'd selected it as a motive. So despite this limited evidence of prehistoric activity, despite the relatively small numbers of finds, the feedback from the volunteers was overwhelmingly positive. People were just enjoying getting out there, digging with like-minded people, learning something new. Didn't matter about whether they found anything or not. Obviously, that would have been, the icing on the cake, but it really wasn't hugely imperative. So it clearly shows, and overall the Lost Stones of Strath project has demonstrated that there is a strong public interest, a public desire to find out more about rock art. But really there are very few opportunities to do this, and so there is a huge potential for new community engagement projects involving rock art. So just to if I can move this slide on, just wanted to really, just remains to say thank you, huge thank you to all the volunteers for their enthusiasm, humour and tenacity, to Clyde Archaeology for their expert supervision, to the landowners for allowing us to dig up their fields and annoy their horses, and to the Griffin and Kalliacker Community Fund and Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust for supporting the dig, and to everybody who made it a fun and fascinating experience. And thank you for listening.